Welcome to episode 79 of Everything Business Consulting. Today I'm excited to interview Michael F. Schein. Michael is an accomplished journalist and author, having written for the likes of Forbes, Fortune, Huffington Post and Psychology Today. He's the founder and CEO of Microfame Media, a marketing agency that turns consultants into thought leaders. Recently, Michael has penned a book titled The Hype Handbook. Michael, are you hyped up and ready to share valuable insights that will help our listeners become more successful as consultants, coaches, and advisors?
Very hyped up, Julius. I'm especially hyped up that you referred to it as hyped up. That's a really good way to start this thing.
That's what I wanted to hear. We're on the same page. I want to dive straight into the subject of consulting. That's our audience, that's who we seek to help, and that's what you do as well. Your marketing agency, Microfame Media, specializes in helping consultants build a larger presence and get to their audience. How did you come across this need to turn consultants into niche, famous thought leaders?
It's a great question. It really came from two different directions. One direction was that I'm really obsessed with ideas. There are a lot of things in this world that I am quite bad at. I have to drive somewhere later tonight, and there's an 80% chance that I'll get lost. But one thing that I'm very good at is coming up with ideas. I love ideas. I read very widely. And I think the world is made better when the best ideas get an audience. And consultants are in the business of ideas. I mean, they don't have hardware that they're selling. They don't have hard assets. It's I think $150 billion industry that's all about getting great ideas. And something I would see when I came up as a copywriter and that sort of thing was that a lot of times the consultants who had the ideas that could really change the world. I remember in one case, a gentleman who had a company whose process was saving lives at hospitals. Those ideas don't often get the audience they need to spread far and wide. And it's often because those consultants really kind of just think their ideas will rise to the top on their own merits, as if people were rational. And then the ideas that aren't so good, that are kind of empty or sometimes even harmful, get a really big audience. And it just became very important to me to use whatever talents I have in this kind of promotional space to get the best ideas, the best audience. And the other reason was that consultants already know they need it. You know, when I in the early days, I would try to sell to every kind of company. And you would talk to someone who had a real estate company or a products company, and they would just sort of say, why do I need what you do? They needed what we did, but they didn't get it. A consultant inherently understands that their success is a direct function of how much they're seen as an authority in their niche. So that part of the prep was already done for me in working with consultants.
You're a self-proclaimed hype artist, and your book is titled The Hype Handbook, and you use the principles of hype in your agency to help consultants. Can you explain exactly what this is and how it would relate to our audience?
Sure. And I should preface this by saying that I am fully aware that the word hype has a negative connotation for many people. That said, I made a decision to use the word because I think that marketing is a very overused word that has come to mean something very different than what it started out as. What marketing has really come to mean is, can you push the right buttons on the right technology? Someone will try to hire a marketing agency and they won't ask questions about getting people excited, getting people in a sales mindset. They'll ask questions about, are you going to build an Instagram following? Should we do blogging? Do we need a podcast? Right? And those are all valuable tools, but they're tools. And what I noticed was that the people who are the best quote unquote marketers, the people who get that result we're looking for, which is getting a lot of attention to make whatever sale you're trying to make, are often not people who consider themselves marketers. They're celebrities. They're unfortunately some really nasty people like propaganda artists and cult leaders, but some great people like Richard Branson. They're people who just understand mass human psychology and know how to use it to get results. So what I've done is I've redefined hype for my own purposes and that of my clients as any set of activities that gets a group of people extremely excited so that they'll take an action. And it's neither moral nor immoral. It just is. Human beings act certain ways in groups. These are the activities or stimuli that get people agitated, excited, transcendent, and you can move them in a positive way or a negative way. And just, I think it's really important to set it apart from a term that's become really unuseful, which is marketing.
Can you repeat that? The phrase you used, a group of activities or a set of activities that encourages, what was it, people to take action? Was that what you said?
Almost. I say that hype is a set of activities that gets people, a group of people, highly emotional so that they'll take the action that you want them to take.
And that's very useful for both a consultant but also the clients of a consultant. If you're looking to help a business to reach more people, obviously that's going to work for them as well. Now I want to ask you the question, what differences do you see between consultants who make it big, who are able to build this presence, and the ones that actually struggle to get off the ground and get moving?
Well, let's set as a given for this equation that the consultant is at least competent. There are consultants out there who really aren't good at what they do, and they can snow people for a while because there's no sort of hard product. They can snow people for a while into buying what they sell, but they're eventually doomed to fail. So let's assume that they can do their job. They're competent at their job. I would say once you hit that benchmark, the single most important factor by a long shot is whether you can get people highly emotional so that they'll take an action, whether you are perceived as the authority in your niche. So, and I won't name names, although you can do a search online and find me talking kind of tough around certain people who call themselves consultants. But there are a lot of consultants out there who, if you dig through the polish and the hype, the stuff is just okay. It's fine. It's not that original. It gets a result. It's not really doing or saying anything new. And then you'll find other people who their stuff is so groundbreaking, but there's often because their stuff is so good, there's also often a resentment. It's kind of like, why should I have to play these games? And that kind of reminds me of people who enter the dating world and say, why should I have to play games to try to get a woman or a man to like me? And you can think of it as a game, and that's where people get in trouble. Or you can say, look, human beings aren't rational. They get excited about certain things that are inexplicable. And if I'm able to generate a lot of attention myself, independent of what my stuff is, I'll be, very, very successful. Now, the perfect combination, and we've all seen them, are those consultants whose stuff is extremely useful and extremely valuable, but also does a really good job of generating that kind of emotion in their niche. And they're the billion-dollar companies.
I really want to dig into some actionable takeaways that we can have a look at for our network to use. But before I do that, Michael, I want to ask you about people who are considering becoming business consultants or making the changes to become better at what they do. Often I hear that they're apprehensive about changing tact or starting something completely different. What advice would you give them?
I would say that you should first assess the risk of doing the same as everyone else is doing. Whether it's marketing or this thing I'm calling hype or even consulting activity, the way I like to describe it in my world, which is kind of the broad marketing and promotion world, is as soon as there's a marketing book written about a certain marketing strategy or tactic, it's too late. Because marketing, and I'm calling it marketing right now, but you can call it whatever you want to call it, promotion, public relations, thought leadership, hype as I call it, is all about setting yourself apart. It's about getting attention. It's about generating emotion. And if you think that there's an A plus B plus C equals D kind of thing that's going to get you there, you're mistaken. But we see the fear driving those decisions all the time. So for many years, people were selling these knowledge courses. Every consultant I talked to or executive coach that I talked to for a brief period of time was saying, I want to productize my business. I'm creating a digital course, an online course. I heard that 2 out of every 3 consultants and coaches that I talked to, not including McKinsey and those kind of people, but the, $100 million, $20 million, $1 million a year consultancies. And the way they would do it, they would set up a sales funnel. They would have that little ticking clock, they would have a webinar. And they figured because they read in a book somewhere or saw on a webinar that worked, that it was a risk-free proposition to do the digital course and set it up in that way. And lo and behold, it didn't work. And they're still doing their one-on-one consulting or their workshops. And that's because it's very risky to do what everyone else is doing, but we're not wired to think that way. That somehow feels safer. And it's not. It's actually very dangerous. That's how you go out of business.
That's very interesting you say that. I hear that kind of thing even a lot in current times, where it seems to be the easy road and the road that people think they can go down because a lot of other people are doing that. But like yourself, I have not seen much success in our network or even people I talk to who have been able to accumulate much business in that way.
And I want to just add, it's a pattern. 10 years ago, blogging was the hot thing. Everyone, saw there were these bloggers who did do something different and made millions of dollars blogging. So everyone started blogging. And I would do these talks to consultants and I would say, okay, who here has tried to blog? And 75% of the room would raise their hand. And then I would say, who here has made even $1 from their blog? And no one would raise their hand, or one person would raise their hand. It'd be a room of 100 people. But somehow that's the safe bet. This is a cycle we see. Every new trend, we see this same pattern.
It's a revelation, really. Something so simple, but it makes so much sense. Now, if that doesn't work, I'd like to dive into some strategies that do work. So the everyday business consultant within our ConsultX network generally has anywhere between 5 and 15 clients as an individual, perhaps from mixed industries, sometimes they're niche, but not always. Generally, they are in a local area or business district. Now, I want you, Michael, to help us through some hype strategies that they could implement to boost their business.
So I'm going to, as much as I can in the brief time that we have, talk on a high level about the 2 hype strategies that in some ways sort of serve as the bone in the soup that nourishes you. There are 12 hype strategies in my book, 12 hype strategies in my program, and they're all very important, but some of them work in some cases, some of them work in others. There are 2 or 3 hype strategies that I've never seen a successful consultant, thought leader, et cetera, the ones who go beyond $1 million in revenue, that really becomes gurus in their space, that they don't use this. So one of them is what I call make war, not love. People misunderstand this. When I say to people that you need to pick a fight, which is what I'm about to say, they think I'm saying be aggressive, be a jerk, be a troll. I am not saying that at all. That can actually hurt you. But there's been a lot of research done on the reality that human beings are much more strongly attracted to a point of view that is against something than a point of view that is for something. So for many years, and this was more for product marketing, but it holds for consulting, people would say you shouldn't sell features, you should sell benefits. And that's a step in the right direction. So let's talk about a really boring industry, project management software. So a way to sell features would be the project management software has Gantt charts, it has, it's cloud-based, et cetera. That would be selling, features. Benefits would be, because we have Gantt charts, you can save X amount of time with your software. That's a little bit better. What I would recommend, and then I'll shift it to how this works for consultants, is being against a common point of view in your industry. So Basecamp was a project management software. What was useful about the software was that it was very stripped down. It only does about 5 things by design. And they could have gone out and said, our project management software is better than Salesforce because it's easier to use, it's simpler to use. But they didn't do that. What they did is they wrote a book, the founders, called Rework, which basically picked a fight with dominant corporate culture. They said, fire your workaholics. If you have a culture where people are working around the clock, that means you're not efficient enough and you're not doing a good job. Have a 4-day work week in the summer. Take things away from your offering instead of adding it. Now, what did that do? There were all of these people out there who probably felt the same way they did, but they didn't have a leader to rally around. And now all of these dispersed, diverse individuals could say, wow, maybe the emperor does have no clothing. Let's rally around these people. And to this day, Basecamp is a company that people would wear a t-shirt for. No one's wearing a Salesforce t-shirt unless they got it for free. But people will wear a Basecamp t-shirt. It's kind of a tribe. So if you're a consultant, what I would say, because you're in even a better situation, you're selling your ideas. Instead of saying, why is my idea great, best of line solutions, and all these cliches that people use, what is a point of view held by people in my industry, by, kind of the gospel in my industry, that I'm really against, that I really disagree with? So in my case, because I'm kind of a consultant in a way, in the field of promotion and that sort of thing. In my case, it was that marketing is an outmoded concept. This idea that data solves everything, that technology solves everything, that everyone in my field seems to believe, I'm against it. I think that's a mess. So then when you figure out what you're against, then say to yourself, what is a point of view that you are 100% confident is the case that most people in your industry disagree with? My point of view is that you're better off looking at the bad guys and repurposing their tactics for good than following what all of the legitimate marketers do. So that combination gets people to perk their heads up. It got me on your show. It gets me a lot of press. It gets people to rally around me versus just being some marketing agency. So that's the first technique. I would say that's extremely, extremely valuable. Now I can talk to you about ways to actually go out into the world to do that. What I did was I would write articles poking holes in the gurus, who were full of hot air, who got the most attention, and they would respond to me directly, all angry, and it would get me attention. But that's not for everyone. That's because of my style. But it's easier to come up with the specific tactics than it is to come up with the philosophy. And if you can figure out what you're against and really believe it, and what you're 100% confident is the point of view that's counterintuitive, the rest of it will follow. Give it a shot. It really does guide your action in a useful way. And then there are some other ones we can talk about as well, but that's a big one.
You mentioned in that you'd look at the bad guys and repurpose their content. What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that, so this is an in-depth topic, so bear with me, but as I mentioned before, there are certain mass psychology principles that just work, right? Picking a fight, theatricality, certain modes of storytelling, various things that we can go through. And throughout history, while all kinds of people have used these strategies, you'll see time and time again that some of the more nefarious characters in history have used these things. The way they use language, the way they create us and them dynamics, all of these things. So I asked myself this question. I said, is the fact that some of these nefarious characters use these strategies, does that mean that the strategies themselves are negative? Because if they are, I want nothing to do with it. I left an industry that I didn't believe in to start my own business, and I wasn't going to go do that to make money by any means necessary. I wanted to make the world a better place. However, if instead it's just the case that these things work and they're just almost like laws of human nature, what is it that makes it so that the bad guys, quote unquote, use it more than the good guys? And what I found through my research is that people with antisocial personality disorder, psychopaths, narcissists, sociopaths, they quite literally don't have physiological reactions when they're in interpersonally stressful situations. So they did these lab experiments where they kind of cooked up, using actors, stressful situations, and a control group would get agitated. Their heart rate would go up, their breathing would get shallow. Whereas the antisocial people, that wouldn't happen. So, in other words, people with antisocial personality disorder look at other human beings like chess pieces. They do what they need to do to get the reaction they want to get, and they don't let the shoulds get in the way. Whereas a lot of the rest of us say, oh, it makes me feel uncomfortable. I'm not so sure I'm comfortable. I shouldn't do that. However, there are a lot of people throughout history who have used the same tactics, like Martin Luther King, Richard Branson, Warren Buffett, who have figured out how to take advantage of mass psychology for positive aims. So what I said to myself was, if I can set up a moral filter, I won't ever deceive anyone and I'll always make people better off than I found them. Can I use these same mass psychology strategies? And it turns out that I could, and other people can too.
I've been reading an article recently, I came across it, in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. He mentions it. It's called the common denominator of success. I don't know if you've heard of that. But the common denominator of success is the secret of success of every person who has ever been successful lies in the fact that they formed the habit of doing things or doing something that others don't like doing. That's the normal person who feels uncomfortable versus the psychopath who just does it because they're chasing their means to an end.
I love that. I have heard that Stephen Covey quote, and I never before made that connection. I'm going to use that in the future. So thank you. That's a really great way to look at it.
You mentioned that you had a second habit, Mike, or a second principle that you thought that our consultants could use. Do you want to dive into that now?
Yeah, in terms of pure sort of financial return, I've probably personally done the most business by utilizing this principle than any other. And it's something that I call build a secret society. Sometimes I call it the piggybacking method. And it's got a lot of commonalities to networking, but it's not the same thing. And the devil really is in the details. So what all hype artists that I've seen, that people I consider hype artists who are benevolent and not so benevolent, what they do is they make it seem like their success is completely grassroots, right? So like their stuff is so good that person by person by person, millions of people are discovering their stuff and it's becoming a phenomenon. But what they almost all do to a one is simultaneously nurture a tight-knit circle of friends, connections, what have you, to accelerate their progress very quickly. And what they used to call this is the old boys network. It's kind of an outdated term, but you've heard that phrase before. It's who you know. I can't become successful because I don't have an old boys network around me. Well, you can foster an old boys network or old girls network. And this is different than networking, where you just go out and you schmooze around and you go to events and you make introductions and that sort of thing. What this is Tucker Max was this guy who was an author. He wrote this book, I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell. They called it Fratire. It was basically a document of his exploits with partying and with women, and it sold millions and millions of copies. So he was known as this sort of frat boy womanizer. And years went by and he had a family and he didn't want to be known that way anymore. So he wanted to start a new business. And it was a ghostwriting business. He had a systematic ghostwriting process. It was originally called Book in a Box. I think they changed their name. But he didn't want to spend another 10 years building up this market because he had his old following. They probably could barely read, let alone, wanting ghostwriting services. So what he did was, over the years, he created this circle around himself. Tim Ferriss, Ryan Holiday, I think Neil Strauss might have been part of it. And the minute that he created the new business, he basically went out to all of them. They all put him on their podcasts and on their platforms within a 1 month period. And they did $1 million in revenue in like 3 months or 1 month or something. So how do you do that? What you do is you connect with people on a human level first, and you look for how to give up things that are cheap for you to give up and valuable to them. So for example, let's say you're using social media and you find someone that you want to know, someone that you want to get to know. You can say to them, hey, can I pick your brain for a business meeting? I'm really a big admirer of your work. And that's fine, but it puts you in a submissive role. Even if you're expressing admiration to their work, it's kind of like, yeah, you're a fan boy or a fangirl. Whereas, let's say you're into music and you see someone post something about an obscure band that you like, or you can kind of really advance their ego in some way, not about something that they're always getting their ego spoken to about, but something they don't usually get attention for. You know, for example, a journalist once got a prominent interview with David Bowie because he asked to talk about his saxophone playing. And David Bowie loved saxophone. It was his first instrument, but he never got attention for that. People talked about Ziggy Stardust and his costumes and his songs and his performance, but he loved the sax. He plays sax on every record. So this guy did a bit of research and said, can I interview Mr. Bowie about his sax playing? And that really touched Bowie, the childhood part of Bowie, the dreamer part of Bowie. And he got this big interview. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is there something that's easy or cheap for you to give up that's extremely valuable for someone else? So an example here, I used to write for Inc. magazine. And I got an interview with this guy, Dave Lindsay, who, great guy, started a $500 million company, Defender Direct, literally from his garage. You hear that term a lot. He was assembling alarm kits in his garage when he started. And, you know, I did the interview. He was very cordial, but it was the normal sort of at a distance interview. And then he let slip at one point that he had just moved from Indianapolis to New York because he was taking a backseat in the company. He had built systems. And he really, really loved live music. And you can probably tell from a lot of my references that I'm a big music fan. So at the time, I was in my early 30s. I still knew where to go to live music. And this was a guy who could have chartered a private airplane. But the one thing he didn't know was where the cool bands were playing in New York City. And I knew that. So I said, oh, I'll take you around. Absolutely. And he became one of my biggest mentors. He became extremely valuable to my career. So can you help someone's kids? Can you keep your ears open and look for something that's really easy for you, but that will change their world, that will make them happy? That's how you build friendships instead of just sort of networking opportunities. That's how you create this circle around you. And you don't want to then go and say, hey, can you do me a favor? What you want is a group of people that surrounds you that's your scene. Because just like you would call your buddy up to help you move a couch, you would call a member of your scene up to help you promote your new business, but not right away.
That strategy that you just mentioned, looking for an interest or something that's, you know, fairly cheap or free to give up, that's a very good way to start the conversation, I find, when going out and talking to people in person. Like if you walk in somewhere and you can see a photo on the wall of a yacht, or one instance that I've used quite a few times because I've typically worked in the automotive industry, is find out what sort of cars they have or aspire to have and go and buy a little model of one. It's something, you know, might cost $50, and you put that on their desk and you've got them as a client, or you keep them for a very long time as a client. It's something that is, you know, it's received very, very well.
I love that. I remember even back when I worked at a job in the call center industry, I remember the headhunter who kind of were a necessary evil. They came into the office to talk to us, and they came in with donuts and coffee, but it was in Miami. It wasn't donuts, I'm sorry, pastries and coffee. But it was in Miami, and I had mentioned that the one thing I liked about Miami was the Cuban food. And so she brought really good cafe con leche and Cuban pastries. But when I say really good, I don't mean from an expensive place. The best cafe con leche is from the little bodega place on the corner. And I worked with that person forever. It was really meaningful. And it was the smallest gesture.
We find that within our network, that it's those small things of paying attention and always turning up, with a smile and a cup of coffee that the person likes. That's what builds the long-term relationship. I want to go back, Mike, to what we were talking about before, about making war not love, and an actual method of doing this. This is something that I saw a consultant doing recently in my neck of the woods, where they basically told tradesmen, which were their target market, that they were pricing absolutely incorrectly. All tradesmen their pricing methods were upside down, and you should follow me and I'll teach you how to make more money. Can you speak to that or other actionable methods that one of our consultants could actually pick up and implement?
Yeah, I'd like to see how that did. The proof is the details are everything, but that sounds like a really good method. In terms of actual tactics, so I think calling out how the emperor has new clothing, as long as you're not a jerk about it, is extremely valuable. And it should line up with your ideas and line up with what you're selling. So there's this concept that there's no such thing as bad publicity. And I don't believe in that, because there's really bad publicity. We've seen people with social media destroy their careers, not even meaning to, just by making an off-color joke or what have you. But a lot of times what we see is that there's something in an industry that's considered a given, that is so entrenched that people don't even question it. So I'll give you an example. One of my clients recently, we go through an exercise with the business where I have the clients go on their competitors' websites and list all of the cliches that they see over and over again, the kind of corporate jargon that they see again and again. And then I force them to debate with me why that corporate jargon is wrong. So one of the things that this client put was, people are our greatest resource, right? We hear that so much that we all assume that it's true. And I said, debate to me why that's not true. And her original gut reaction was to say, well, it is true. And I said, is it? Okay, well, pretend that it's not. She started to think and she said, well, maybe it isn't true, because honestly, if you, in a perfect world, you would have very few people working at your company. It's a lot of overhead. Sometimes there are jobs that don't need to exist. We don't want to believe that, but especially if we're a small business, people aren't our greatest resource. Gold is a resource. You can't buy things with people, right? I mean, that's not a resource. It's something that helps get the job done. What is a resource? Customers are a resource. People help you service your customers. Customers are your greatest resource. Why is nobody saying that? So imagine if you wrote an article, something that simple, on LinkedIn that said, people are your greatest resource, think again. Actually, customers are your greatest resource. And you become known as the person who is busting that bubble that everyone has just assumed. So one thing is, look at those cliches. Look at those things that are so entrenched in your industry that people won't even question it, and then take the exact opposite point of view in a way that lines up with your target market, and then write an article, create a video. And I'm a big believer in small steps, especially if you're going to be contrarian. Start out by doing it in a setting that is restricted, that if you fall on your face, not too many people are going to see it. And don't measure sales, measure intensity. Are people responding with, oh, nice article, or are they writing paragraph-long answers telling you how interesting it is? Are they offering to volunteer their time because what you're saying is so important? Another thing to do is look at the real gurus in your industry and say to yourself, is their advice actually good? Or is their advice at odds with the reality? And call that out respectfully. So, for example, one of the things I did to launch my career really that really kind of brought me out of borderline poverty and helped me build my business when I had left my corporate job and was living off savings was that I wrote an article called Why Gary Vaynerchuk is Flat Out Wrong. So I don't know if your audience knows a lot about him, but he's this internet guru, very big in my space, whose whole thing 10 years ago was hustle, hustle, hustle. He used to say, I get up at 3 a.m. to go to the bathroom, I sit on the toilet, and I tweet from the toilet, because that's how important it is to constantly be on social media. And I would notice there was a discrepancy between that advice and what was really going on, which is he doesn't even write his own articles. He has ghostwriters. Everything he does is systematized. But all these young people, these kids, would follow him like a guru, and they weren't getting rich. But Gary kept getting richer and richer. So I basically called him out and said, look, Gary's got systems, but you're following his advice. Pay attention to what he does, not what he says. And if you can be the person, the truth teller, the oracle, the one who says that the emperor has no clothing, then you can dethrone the current emperor. That takes some guts. But as long as you don't insult their looks, their personality, as long as you're respectful for what they've accomplished, there's no harm in saying, look, the old guard is old hat. The salon isn't where we should be showing art anymore. We need a new art exhibition.
You'd have to update that article, Mike, and make it something to the effect of why Gary V's NFTs are going to zero.
Yeah, well, that's another one, right? I mean, think about this. A lot of these gurus, we could go crazy on this topic, but NFTs, so everyone jumps on NFTs. So there's a guy named Tai Lopez, and I actually don't mind talking smack about this guy because he actually, I have some moral issues with him. But every time there's a new trend, a new Ponzi scheme, he jumps on top of it. I'm not saying he's a thief or anything, but, Bitcoin, crypto, everyone's jumping on it. So he comes out with a course, how to make millions on crypto. And I say to myself, a week ago, you didn't even know what crypto was, right? So it's a function of, is he really investing in crypto? Pay attention to what the gurus do and how it differs from what they're saying. And if you can expose that, it goes a long way. It's kind of like, I look at examples not from business. And if you look at every artistic scene, how artists make their name is by destroying the old movement and saying the young, new people are in town. Impressionism destroyed realism. Cubism destroyed impressionism. Abstract expressionism overthrew Cubism. And then when Andy Warhol came out, all of the abstract expressionists who were supposed to be these young bucks when they were young, they were old men. And they became the old cranks. And Andy Warhol was the new young guy. And he dethroned them. He said, this stuff is old-fashioned. You got to dethrone the king.
Mm-hmm. Mike, do you have any book recommendations? You said you really like to read and you read a wide variety of stuff. Is there anything you could suggest that our audience take a look at?
Gosh, so many. On this kind of hype topic or just anything in general? Or what would be the most useful, do you think?
Well, tell us a little bit about your book and then maybe a couple of general consulting ones.
Yeah, so my book, I'll read you the subtitle. And it's so long, it's like the Borat movie that I don't even remember the order. But it's 12 indispensable... So it's the Hype Handbook. And it's 12 indispensable success secrets from the world's greatest propagandists, self-promoters, cult leaders, mischief makers, and boundary breakers. So what I did is I looked at those kinds of people and I said, are there unifying principles that hold them all together? Are these people just all over the map and they're just good at what they do? Because there's no book in that. There's no real prospect. There's no program in that. Or are there these sort of under the surface general themes? And it turns out there really are. And we have a whole program based on it, but that's what the book's about. It's how do you learn those themes? How do you separate those themes from the details and apply them ethically to your own stuff? And that was really fun because I wanted to be a writer before I wanted to be a business person. I love my business, but that was what happened. But I wanted to be a novelist. So the book was published by McGraw-Hill and I had a lot of fun. I got to read a lot of books about really interesting people and synthesize them and do really cool interviews. So that was a blast. I'm going to give you a book that I read at the outset of starting my business that really influenced me a lot. And it's called The Click Moment by Franz Johansen. So Franz Johansen is a consultant, an innovation consultant, who is best known for a book called The Medici Effect, which is also very good. The one that I really got a lot out of was called The Click Moment. And what it basically says is that we all try to strategize success. You know, you hear these stories about people who planned for success and they had this equation to succeed and really strategized everything. But it turns out the world and reality is very, very random. You never know what's going to happen. You never know. There's serendipity, there's randomness, there's chaos, all of these things. So how do you, knowing, and most of the things that have become big successes happen very randomly. So Microsoft, they had DOS, but they were working on Windows and they were ready to ramp Windows down. It wasn't working. They couldn't figure out how to make it work. And there was a Christmas party or a holiday party, don't quote me, and someone who worked at Microsoft had a run-in with a guest who was also a really good computer engineer. And they were talking about the challenge and collaborating. They figured out a theory for how they might fix it. And they got all excited just by the challenge and said, hey, let's go into a side room. Let's figure this out right now. And that collaboration allowed them to crack the code and made them the most powerful company in the world. So what Franz Johansen does is he says, okay, if everything is random, can you create a system for capturing randomness? So one thing he says is, again, take small bets. So instead of dumping $10 million into one initiative, spread it into $1 million into 10 initiatives, and then double down and triple down on the ones getting traction. Pay attention to, what does he call them? Complex forces. So how do you know if something's working if it isn't paying off yet? And I mentioned this earlier. It's really embedded in what I do. Are people volunteering their time? Are people really intense about it? Are people asking questions? Well, then you might want to double down. Look at things outside of your field and know people outside of your field to increase the chance of having random sort of collisions. So not only has this really been a big part of how I run my business and how I build hype experiments with my clients, it also makes me feel not that guilty when I'm reading books about random, interesting topics. I feel like I'm working, even if I'm reading about the Bible. I read this book on who wrote the Bible, who really wrote the Bible, but I kind of felt like I was working because who knows where the next idea will come from.
I wish I could read more for my job. So that was The Click Moment by Franz Johansen and also Michael F. Schein's The Hype Handbook. I'll put links to those in the show notes. Now, nearing the end of our interview, Mike, can you give us a couple of gold nuggets of advice that will help people in our audience to become more successful business consultants?
Yeah, we talked a little bit in advance about this question, and what I was going to say was figure out the point of view that you absolutely hate in your industry and figure out the point of view in your industry that you're absolutely confident is the case, and then combine the two to figure out your point of view. Those are two. I would also say look for side doors. So when I left my corporate job, I knew that I wanted to have something to do, I thought, I shouldn't say I knew, with writing and with creativity. And I was working at a company that ran customer service centers. So I had this extremely good idea that I thought couldn't fail. And it was that I was always looking for copywriters who knew the call center industry. I was a good writer and I knew the call center industry, and white papers were big. So I was going to become the world's first exclusively contact center oriented white paper writer. And I was convinced the world needed this and that this idea couldn't fail. And if I knew how bad this idea really was, I never would have started my business because I got like 2 jobs in that sector, and that was the extent of who wanted it. That being said, I kept my eyes open for side doors. So when I was fishing about for copywriting work, someone offered me a telecommunications job, and I took that, writing job, and I took that because it wasn't directly attached, but it was attached, and that led to enterprise technology. And then I needed to find ways to market myself. So I had played in punk bands in the past, and after really struggling with marketing, I said, well, we were really good at selling out shows. Maybe I should look at that sort of thing. And we used to call that hype. So I started to explore hype. And then I wasn't hyper fixated on being a writer. I could have been. I've always wanted to be a writer. I said, is there a business in this? So, and now I wrote a book. For years, I wanted to write a book, and I took this roundabout way. And now I wrote a book that I'm really proud of. So if you're saying to yourself, I really need to own a SaaS company. My whole life I've wanted a SaaS company, or my whole life I've wanted a management consulting company, to own my own company. And you just kind of pound the front door the way everyone else has and just keep pushing and working and hustling to get through that door. A lot of times you're going to miss that the hallway is lined with all these side doors that might get you to the exact destination. And that's been invaluable to me, because if I would have kept pounding that front door, I'd be a failed contact center white paper writer with some sort of job right now.
I really like that. Look for those side doors and go knocking there rather than trying to pound down the front door. That's something that we've seen in our network many times. Rather than walking in like you're wanting to present a proposal, simply go down to the local pub and find the business owner down there and just ask him how's business going. Starting the conversation, something like that. There's so many examples I could give of where going direct isn't always the best or fastest way you can start the conversation, like you say, from a slightly different avenue. Now, Michael, if anyone wants to reach out to you, where can they find you and your book?
Well, so thank you for the opportunity to talk about that. I mean, my company is Microfame Media. Fame, not frame. Sometimes people get it wrong. So it's Microfame Media, microfamemedia.com. I'm all over the internet, but the one thing I have learned from traditional marketers is that you should always have one call to action. So I'm going to say that if you really want to know about me and what I do, go to Amazon and type in the Hype Handbook and order the book. And, of course, I have a vested interest in seeing that because I want to sell books. But the real reason is that if you read that book, you'll know everything about my philosophy and what I do, and you'll be able to contact me through the information on there. But there's no other better way to learn about what I do than just jumping on Amazon or your local book selling site and buy the book.
And if you love audio, it's on Audible as well. That's where I have listened to it. I'm going through for my second time now, just to refresh myself before this podcast. Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I know our listeners will be ready to get on board the hype train after this one.
I feel the same way, Julius. This was a particularly fun interview. I appreciate it.